Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing a review of the Sigma Contemporary 16mm 1.4 DC DN lens. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. So the Sigma 16mm 1.4 DC-DN contemporary lens is the third lens of the original trio of DC-DN contemporary lenses that I've reviewed. I did a review of the 30mm 1.4 in my Street Photography Austin episode. Check out the link to that. I did a review of the 56mm 1.4. You can also check out a link to that. And now I am doing the third 16mm 1.4 DC-DN. Yes, they did just come out with a 23mm. I'm totally aware of that, but I have not yet gotten a hold of one. Maybe I'll do a shootout between that and the Fuji 23, and maybe I'll also do the Viltrox one day. But I haven't checked that lens out, and it's not super high on my priority list yet. But let's talk about this lens right here. At its widest open, it's 1.4. As the name suggests, it goes all the way down to f/16. If you're a Fuji purist, I'm already telling you right off the bat, there is no aperture ring on this. So if you're not a fan of not having an aperture ring, this is the part where you exit the review unless you're just simply curious about the image quality. It has 16 elements and 13 groups. The minimum focusing distance is 0.9 feet. It has an 83-degree field of view. The front filter thread on it, 67 millimeters, which is a very common filter thread size. It comes with a lens hood, and 16 millimeters on a 1.5 crop, for those of you in the full frame world, is about 24 millimeters, so it's a wide angle lens, and it's gonna start getting into the distortion on the outside at 24 millimeter. You may be wondering what the price is on this guy. It comes in at $449 normally. It's on rebate right now for $399. And if you're the type of person who doesn't buy new, man, you can get these for $270, $299 US dollars. So what is 16 millimeters good for? Well, you can do wide shots like you're seeing right now. I'm actually using a 17 millimeter shot, as you see right here. So it's only, whoa. Fucking tree branch just fell. So what is 16 millimeters good for anyway? Well, it's a wide angle view. So if you want to tell a story and show more environment and not quite get in as tight, 16 millimeter on APS-C is perfect for that. It's great for street photography. It's great for landscapes, video, vlogging, and sometimes you can use it as a creative focal length for portraiture. And we're gonna test all that out on today's episode. So without further ado, let's get started. We're checking out the 16 millimeter for video. Let's start off with a vlog test. So this is the lens for vlogging. This is as wide as it gets. I'm holding my arm out pretty steady. You're gonna hear some noise because there's a lot of flooding going on because it finally started raining here in Austin. But this is the wide shot. You know, let me know what you think. Is 16 millimeter enough? Is it wide enough for you for vlogging? I think it's perfectly fine for vlogging. If you do need a wider shot than this, then you're gonna need to probably get something more in the 10 millimeter range. But let's just shoot some video real quick with it and just see what we can get. Here's some handheld video that I'm doing on it as I walk around. You can kind of see how this works in conjunction with image stabilization in the body, because there is no image stabilization in the lens. So you can see I'm trying to hold my hand as steady as possible, and these are the results that I'm getting. So you can determine as to whether or not this works well for you for video. Here, let me just kick this guy, because why not? There we go. All right, let's move on to something else. It was somewhat of a gloomy day, and I didn't really get a lot of great material for video, but here is the Shoal Creek washout flooding into the Colorado River. I'm going to go ahead and put some filler in from previous episodes where I know I used the 16mm, so you can check it out and see that yes, in fact, this lens slays on video, and that's a great thing, but let's go see what it can do on stills. So as you can see in these examples, as a portrait photographer, I definitely put this lens to great use for agencies, helping models build their portfolios. I love this lens because it gives me a different perspective for wide environmental portraiture. Then I can also use it as my video lens for this YouTube channel. So we've observed that it does great for environmental portraiture, but let's take it out onto the streets and see how it does for street photography and photojournalism. Now that I've had this lens for over a year, let me tell you how I feel about it. I hope you enjoyed those street photography images. There were a few keepers in there, but like every session, some are going to be better than others, but it did give me a great venue to showcase the 16mm 1.4. So I have been using this lens for well over a year now, and I want to give you my thoughts on it. I didn't do a review where I had, a couple days with it or a couple weeks with it, and then I said, okay, this is the ultimate ruling. I've actually used this on my professional work. I've used it on street photography. I've taken it on 3 different vacations. So I feel like I have enough time under my belt that I can give you my absolute ruling on this lens and how I feel about it. So construction-wise, it's built incredibly well. It is weather sealed. As you saw earlier in the episode, I was using it in a rainy environment. It does just fine there, but it's constructed incredibly well. In terms of sharpness, I mean, gosh, this lens is super sharp, and for $449 maximum price, you can get it for $399 on rebate. You can't really find a sharper lens out there. They've got the 2.8 version of this for Fuji that's like $399, but it's 2 stops of light darker. And so going from a 2.8 to 1.4 is significant, especially if you're doing low light, especially if you want subject isolation and bokeh. Speaking of bokeh, what are my thoughts on the bokeh on this lens? I think the bokeh is rather smooth. You don't really buy a 16mm lens for its bokeh, but because it goes to 1.4, it actually gives you a decent amount of bokeh, which heck yeah, let's roll with that. I've used this lens with the XH2, the X-T20, and the XS10. And with all three camera bodies, the autofocus is really awesome in single point. As you can see right here, this is some XH2 footage of me using the lens, and it's just locking onto what I'm telling it to lock onto. You can also see from my street photography examples, it did a pretty good job of following the subjects. I even used this in a drive mode, and I just wanted to see what it did for subject tracking. I had it track a car, as you can see right here, and it kept it sharp throughout the entire burst. So can this lens do an amazing job? Absolutely. Even at shallow depths of field, it seemed to lock onto the subject in conjunction with the autofocus system of Fuji. So score 1 for the third-party lens. My thoughts on the focus ring: it's really smooth. I don't really shoot a lot of manual focus on this lens, but if you need to, if you are a manual focus type, that is a very large focus ring, and it'll give you a decent amount of throw. And so I found that it's super easy to control manual focus on this lens. So what are some pros of this lens? Well, it's sharp. It has incredible bokeh. It's an incredible value for the money. It does great for vlogging. It does great for video. I find that I can take this lens on pretty much any shoot and it can do double duty. I can use this guy as an alternate focal length for my portraiture if I want to have more environment, but I can also use this as my video lens for my YouTube channel. So if I take this with me on a shoot, it's going to be used for two different purposes. And so that is another thing that adds to the value of this lens. Now let's talk about the things that some people might perceive to be cons. I don't look at this as a con, but a lot of you will, and that is the fact that it does not have an aperture ring. You have to use your command dials on the back, and that's just the way it is. I will also say it's kind of long for a 16 millimeter, so I'll show you my Canon 16mm next to this, and as you can see right here, they are very much different sizes, despite the fact that they're the same focal length. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that it is long. Now, my Canon is a 2.8, and this is a 1.4, so to get those extra 2 stops of light out, yeah, they had to add more materials to it. That's just the way it is. But it does make the lens rather long. I will say, though, that it's not very heavy, and then the center of gravity on it as it sits on my camera, it's not awkward in any way, shape, or form. Even when I put it on my really tiny X-T20, it seems to have a pretty decent balance to it. The only other thing that could be perceived as a negative is there is no image stabilization. So if you are using this in conjunction with an older Fuji body that doesn't have in-body image stabilization, you're definitely going to get some shaky shots, even though this is a 16mm lens. Remember, you have a crop, so it's really more of a 24mm in full frame perspective. And so if you don't have in-body image stabilization in your camera, this isn't going to be a really awesome lens for video unless you're using something like a gimbal or some sort of a handheld handle units like on a cage or something like that. So do keep that in mind. And so who should buy this lens? So I personally love this for my YouTube channel. I love it for portraiture, as I already said. If you're a street photographer, that's going to come down to a matter of taste. Some street photographers like wider shots, and I found myself going more toward this lens if I wanted to shoot more architectural stuff, despite the fact that there was a pretty decent amount of distortion on the wider end, on the outside. And so that's something to keep in mind about this, is that you are going to start getting that barrel distortion with this lens. There are many people out there who would favor the 16, who want to see more environment, but I actually like to capture people interacting with the environment, so I want to be a little tighter. And so I actually would favor the 23mm focal length over this on Fuji. I think it's just a little bit closer, but still gives you enough of the environment. But that is personal taste and preference. For vlogging, I thought I did a pretty good job. With in-body image stabilization, I thought it did incredibly for video. I know a lot of you watching this are landscape photographers, and I regret to inform you that I don't really shoot a lot of landscapes, but I do shoot a lot of cityscapes. I do shoot a lot of street photography, and then I do shoot some infrared on this, some cityscapes, some landscapes that way. And I can tell you, this is going to be a home run for landscape photographers, assuming that the focal length is wide enough for your work. So don't be afraid to get this for landscapes if you like 16mm. As far as alternatives, you really only have the
Fuji 16 millimeter 1.4, which is like $1,000. So it's almost 3 times more than this lens. And as you can see right here in these examples, I took a couple shots with the Fuji lens. I borrowed it and at a Fuji event and took some shots with it. And these look beautiful, but I can't really see something on these shots that makes me go, oh my gosh, these are so much better than the Sigma. They're pretty much in the same ballpark. They do have a slightly different character to them, but they look close enough to where I couldn't really justify getting the 16 Fuji unless it was my bread and butter focal length and I wanted to squeeze like that extra 1% out by paying 3 times more. I will also say that they make a 16 2.8. I did not test that out, but it's a 2.8 and this is a 1.4. So you're talking about 2 stops of difference. And if you're using this in low lighting, 2 stops is everything. And so if this is the same price roughly as the 2.8, I really don't see any reason whatsoever to get the 2.8 unless you just want the smallest setup possible, in which case the 2.8 is a little smaller, it is a little lighter, but it's the same price. So I'd rather have the 1.4. And honestly, if you think that this is heavy, you must have some crazy weight problems, because I come over from Canon and these lenses are super light. I do laugh when I see Fuji users complain about anything weight-wise, because literally any other user, Nikon, Sony, whatever, we all use much heavier lenses. That does it for today's episode. I hope each and every one of you enjoyed this today. I hope that this was educational. I hope it was useful. I hope the examples that I showed in today's video might help you go one way or the other on this lens. I will leave a link in the description below to an affiliate link. If you got pushed over the edge to buy it, I would appreciate a little bit of love, no pressure. But if you like this channel, please, I humbly ask you, click the subscribe button below. And if you like the discussions I have, I do also recommend you go check out my F11 Photography Podcast, which is on Apple and Spotify. You can see it on all the major platforms. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.